Next up is a brilliant topic, Beyond Home, Future Habitants. Well, our next speaker who's going to come up here is the leading residential business across Bengaluru, Chennai, Hyderabad since 2017. She has transformed Brigade's portfolio into a scaled, premium and data-driven growth engine. A strong advocate of sustainable urbanization, recognized among India's most powerful business leader. Ladies and gentlemen, with highest pleasure, please put your hands together. A loud round of applause as I call upon the Managing Director of Brigade Group, Pavitra Shankar, onto the stage, please. A big round of applause.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, actually. Great to be here and nice to talk to all of you about how we are looking at the residential sector and generally the potential for this sector in our country. You know, just a bit of introduction, as was already just mentioned right now. My name is Pavitra. I'm the Managing Director of Brigade Group. Brigade, I hope you all know, is a Bangalore-based real estate firm. This is our 40th year. It was founded by my father, Mr. M.R. Jayashankar, and it is still very much a family-led business, while also being one of the largest listed players in India. We not only do residential, we also are in the commercial, that is office and retail, hospitality. We have a PropTech accelerator. I think many of you may be aware of that as well. And we have supported a number of philanthropic causes. We have founded the Indian Music Experience Museum in JP Nagar, and most recently renovated the Venkatappa Art Gallery close by here. In addition, we run multiple schools and build hospitals that St. John's is operating. And generally, I think we are very much a Bangalore brand and very proud to be so as well. I had a chance to look at all of the various agenda items today, and I thought it was really well curated. A great set of topics that were put together and a great set of speakers. So thank you for having me as the closing keynote. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah. So as we all know, the momentum for India is fantastic. Yes, there's a lot of geopolitical pressures, but at the same time, this is the place where the action is. Regardless of what is going on in the rest of the world, I think India does have a lot of positives in our favor, and naturally, you know, the growth momentum for our country is fantastic. Today, the size of the economy is about $4 trillion US. It's expected to grow to about 10 trillion in terms of GDP by 2035. For that, Indian real estate is expected to reach 1 trillion by 2030 and 1.5 trillion by 2035. So you can imagine the scope for the huge amount of growth. Naturally, a lot of this growth is happening in urban India. We typically track the growth for about 7 to 8 major metropolitan cities, in which the number of homes may be around, we could get to 675 million such homes in the near future. If you just look at, say, the urbanization. Today, that is around 35% of the total country, and that stands to grow to about 50%. So when someone like us, a Brigade, looks at where is our opportunity for growth, naturally, when we're looking to scale, we look at large cities like Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad. These are our target markets. Of course, there are others like NCR, Mumbai, Pune. Ahmedabad is a quickly growing market. But if we look at basically the tier 1 cities, which is what I've just spoken about, there is a potential for those to become really mega cities. So the challenge for those cities is, how do you grow sustainably? How do you invest in infrastructure so that they can continue to be hubs of growth, but also where livability is not impacted for citizens and residents? The other area of growth is, of course, tier 2. So there are a number of different tier 2 cities that, thanks to the infrastructure investments being made by national and state governments, make it much more palatable, I would say, for large companies to look at to drive growth. But also, more importantly, there is opportunity for so many local real estate developers in each of these tier 2 markets to really find opportunities for their own growth. Yeah, and of course, the idea is that we would try to decongest our larger cities by having these hub and spoke kind of models with the tier 2 cities as well. A lot of it depends on infrastructure and connectivity and generally major policies to drive that kind of growth. So today, if we look at it, there are about, if you're looking at about 4 lakh units moving to 9 lakh units in housing in tier 1 cities, and that number is basically about doubling. The same goes for tier 2. It's about 1.5 to 3 that it would double by the time we hit 2035. So with growth, we're naturally going to have so many other expectations of our consumers. How does that really, impact us? Just for the real estate sectors, to set some context, as many of you would be aware of, but in the past 10 years, we've had some of the most major disruptions in the sector, starting with demonetization in November of 2016. It seems like a very far off time, but from then on till now, the real estate sector faced some major shocks, starting with demon. Then prior to that, we had RERA itself, the introduction of RERA regulation, which took quite a while for all operators to really get used to what that would mean in terms of disclosures, in terms of how we work, in terms of business model. So that was a major change. Of course, it was customer friendly and welcome from that manner, from that perspective, but it did cause a lot of disruption on a day-to-day basis. Following that, we had demonetization, after which we had a change in the service tax and VAT regime. That moved into GST. Again, a lot of disruption on that front. There was a NBFC financing crisis due to the implosion of IL&FS. That caused a lot of difficulties for many people in the real estate sector, especially those who had heavy NBFC portfolios or had borrowed from NBFCs a lot. And then finally, as you all know, the biggest shock was really COVID that hit, and the pandemic and the resulting lockdown. So the lockdown with its 3 to 4 months shutdown of every sort of construction activity was a major, major impact on the real estate sector. But what happened after that was actually something that took everybody by surprise. By June 2020 itself, there were green shoots in the residential sector, and before we knew it, things were off to a tearing start and a resumption of business. Why was that actually happening? During COVID, I think everyone reset what was the expectation of their living spaces. They wanted more space. Everyone was working from home. Kids were not in school. So generally, the type of demand for real estate, or especially homes, took off incredibly. While on the one hand, you had no one going into office, everyone was rethinking what to do with their home spaces. There was also a lot of there was a lot of supply that was not moving. If we remember the time frame from 2014 to 2016 and a little beyond that, thanks to all these disruptions, there wasn't much movement in the residential sector. So there was quite a bit of supply overhang, especially in terms of certain kinds of inventory. So with the lower interest rate environment that was there, and in general, the affordability that people had from basically not really doing any discretionary spending due to COVID and the lockdown, people were really able to afford much more in terms of their housing purchases, and that's kind of where things took off. And it gained momentum dramatically, and looking back, we have looked at some of the most impressive sort of pricing increases over the last 2 to 3 years, and spanning even beyond that within our own portfolio in Brigade and in the market at large. So on the one hand, it's good that prices have increased, but on the other hand, it has led to some amount of affordability issues in the market today. So it also created a lot of supply of premium homes over the last few years, and that absorption also has been happening quite at a fast pace. But now we are starting to see that at the premium and luxury or the high-end sector, there is some amount of stabilization that is going on today. What also happened in that last 10 years, there has been dramatic consolidation amongst real estate players as well, and the listing also of many different real estate larger players. As a result, everyone or the large players have got a very strong balance sheet. Most have cleared the debt that they were using to fund their growth or maybe to fund their construction. So if you look at it, it's a very, very healthy balance sheet that most real estate companies who are listed have today. So that has kind of driven the current scenario in the current market today. One of the other changes that helped the premiumization of housing was the increase in per capita income and what we are going to also expect this per capita income to grow to. Today, it's about $3,000 per person. That's expected to move to around $5,700 per person by 2035. And what this means, I think we have seen already the impact, not just in terms of consumption for housing, but across the board, whether it is travel, even school fees, going out to eat, buying concert tickets. Like you can see it across the board in terms of how this premiumization is impacting consumption across our country. So with all this, I also feel that there is a lot of opportunity for the mid segment, which is one segment that's been completely sort of overlooked over the last few years because of the rising trend in premium housing. So given all of this, what this means is that the way we used to do things isn't necessarily how they will be done going forward. With the consolidation and the professionalization of the industry or basically having so many more players listed, what we've seen is that many organizations have an extremely strong focus on sales strategy, business development, branding. You can see this across the board. But I feel that the next wave is really going to come in terms of meeting the customer at their level of expectation of customer experience, of execution, timeliness, quality of the product, and of course, sustainability, which is very hard to do, very hard to make as part of your normal business operations. And more than anything, it's much harder to actually make a reality than just to talk about it. So to actually have the discipline from running your business to focus on these things like quality, execution, timeliness, and the sustainability piece, I think that is the biggest challenge that most of us will be focusing on over the next few years. That will be the differentiator at the time of the next cycle. The other opportunity that we can see is that many are experimenting with new asset classes. Even today, I think there were speakers from senior living, from fractional. And this is a sign of this maturity of the market, of the real estate market, which has happened quite substantially and will continue to do so. The real estate sector in terms of financing and capital is only getting more and more institutional, which means there are so many more opportunities for niche kind of segments to also flourish. So whether it is co-living, student living, senior living on a rental basis, affordable housing, workforce housing, these are all sectors that can stand to really gain over the next few years, provided they get the right kind of investment and the right kind of business model approach. So when we look at what to expect from the residential sector, within Brigade, our core vision of constructing mixed use and building integrated townships, I think that is something that's very core to Brigade, and that's something that has built our brand over the last few decades, and we continue to believe in as a concept in of itself. To date, we have delivered 8 townships of varying scale across Bangalore and Chennai, and we have 4 more under construction and design, including in Hyderabad as well. Each of the townships is very different. It has its own personality depending on where it is and which micro market. We have done residential townships where it's predominantly residential with a range of plotted villas, mid-segment, luxury housing, and so on. And we have also done, I think you all know Brigade Gateway, which is, I would say, the ultimate and best example of mixed use because there we have multiple different types of real estate. Residential, we have the World Trade Center Bangalore, we have retail in the form of Orion Mall, Sheraton Grand, which is the hotel. We also built a school, a hospital, which is now run by Manipal, and a lifestyle club as well around a man-made lake. Today, you don't get these kind of opportunities, especially in core urban areas, to build in this manner. But I think the vision there was to create the kind of lifestyle that we all aspire to. How can we really live in a place where we are protected from the hardships and difficulties of urban living in a growing India? How do we protect ourselves from the lack of infrastructure that we are sometimes not able to have at hand? So this is again core, and it's something that will be a theme going forward over the next few decades as well. Whether it is in tier 1 cities or even tier 2 cities, there is a lot of opportunity for that. Another thing we focused on, which again is part of focusing on customer experience, is at Brigade we focused on ancillary services to real estate, or to the home buying experience. So originally we would just, source the land, develop it, construct it, hand it over, and then we were out of the customer's, journey. But what we realized was if we do the interiors, if we offer services to do the interiors, if we are part of their rental and resale life cycle, if we're part of their community management, the kind of insights that we get into the customer buying behavior, the customer lifestyle, the way in which they want to live, how they want to be communicated to, and how they want to be dealt with once they're living in their townships. There were so much that we could inform in terms of our product design itself. So this is one sort of side business that we set up over the last few years. It's been about 3 to 4 years since Brigade Plus was born. And since then, the growth has been rapid. And more than anything, the insight that we have gotten into how to design large projects, especially mixed use, has really been very, very informative for us, and also will show the difference in our upcoming projects over the coming years when it reflects the kind of design inputs we've been able to give. One thing I'm very proud about is that we have developed our own in-house community management app called Belong. That has also really helped us understand where people use amenities, how they're using them, the kind of challenges you have in gated communities from multiple quick commerce players entering into the space, how to really design your service elevators. There are so many different insights that we have gained from having this first-hand information about customer. So, when I talk design, it's not just about these apartment floor plans, but we're also talking about services and amenities. There is today in Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, in most metropolitan cities, there's a complexity of different cultures coming together, living in the same place. How does all that get balanced? There are different lifestyles and aspirations, which I think is a beautiful mirror of the country's growth and integration that we have. And that also is important for us to keep informing in terms of our future design inputs. I mentioned earlier about quick commerce. Recently, we had an interaction with the people at Zomato, and they were talking about what their delivery people would need from townships. If they were delivering into a township, maybe the presence of dark stores. They would need spaces for dark stores in these townships. They would need accessible restrooms for the people who are delivering, all of basically supporting our lifestyle in terms of giving us our 10-minute delivery of anything that we forgot to order the day before. And in terms of safety of their women delivery partners, in terms of the frequency and the speed of the service lifts, and so on. So I found it extremely interesting that we actually had this insight into, how not just the residents of these places need to use the townships, but also the larger ecosystem as well. So in future, as I mentioned, in future, the community is not just about the residential, but also about the larger, ecosystem. So will it just be your one building, or is it like a larger living system in of itself? So we're looking at the physical design of the building. We're looking at how do you add the services. And then finally, there is a social layer. Like every business, I think the gold standard is how do you help human beings achieve what they want in life while giving them your product. And I think with real estate, that was usually kind of hard to do. But now with the ability to integrate all of these things into the design itself, and looking at things from a bigger picture, this is much more possible today. Sustainability is one element that everyone talks about, but can you really bring that into your design, and can you actually make it financially viable for a developer to do? On the commercial front, we've seen this be much more successful. That's typically because the developer is not just the owner of the property, is not just the developer of the property where you put in the capex and fund or the sustainable features. But on the operating side, once the asset goes live and once you're running the building, you can actually reap the benefits of saving on operations. On the residential side, that's usually not the case because you would have constructed your building and handed it over to the RWA, and the savings from whatever one might have invested in terms of making the building more green, that goes into the hands of the RWA. So it's a big question really in terms of educating the RWA and educating your end customer on why investing into green and paying for green buildings is actually something worth doing. I'm proud to say that recently, it's about 1.5 years ago that we launched Brigade Citrine. It's actually a net zero carbon project, which means from a carbon emission standpoint, it's completely net zero. We have done interventions in terms of the design, in terms of the building materials, but naturally, any activity generally emits carbon. So we are also committed to offsetting all of the carbon emissions for this residential project. When we launched this, it was a challenge, first of all, to just get the right kind of inputs into how we could minimize the emissions from the project, but also educating the customer on what we've done in order to tell them about the savings that they would get from an operational standpoint, and more than anything, connect with the end customer in terms of sustainability and be able to extract the value from them. So Brigade Citrine is pretty much, I would say, about 80% sold out. So I think it has shown a lot of success, at least at the initial stage. I think the hard work of constructing it, delivering it, communicating again at the time of delivery on what someone has committed to get, and then therefore how that would play out for them while they live in the project, that is the next phase of things. But at least we have taken that first step forward. Since then, I understand that a number of other net zero projects have also rolled out. So it's been great to be, again, sort of pioneering this movement, not just in terms of overall real estate, but on residential, net zero buildings, which has generally been difficult to execute so far. Finally, something that's close to my heart is the digital and the technology aspect of what we can do with the residential business and real estate in general. And with the way in which we understand the customer, the way in which we can get those insights, the way in which we can observe how buildings are run and operated, and how that can be made more and more efficient is something that I think there is a huge amount of opportunity. So as we have seen, this is a difficult sector to really overhaul overnight. That's not going to happen. But there are a lot of major movements that have been going on, and it requires more and more adoption from those of us who have the ability to experiment and try out things on pilot basis, and then showing the example and leading the way for others to actually point to and say, hey, if they've done it, I think this is something we could also do. So on that front, there is a huge effort that needs to be put in. But again, there's many good examples of how that's going to go forward. Yeah. So finally, to sort of tie it together, the way in which we see communities is an integration and an amalgamation of all of these things. Building large communities that are not just residential, but also have the ability to pull in on the healthcare front, on the commercial, retail, lifestyle, hospitality, All of this would result in these communities becoming the core and the center of their neighborhoods. I think we have seen this happen with our own projects over the last few decades, and as we deliver more and more townships, it's definitely the case. I think one of my favorite things is to envision what that neighborhood is going to look like once the whole place has been developed. Yesterday, we actually had a completion event at one of our large townships in Vartur, and I could very clearly remember the Bhumi Puja when it was just an empty land. So it was quite emotional actually to come back to that project, having sold it, constructed it, handed over, having had all of the, the teething troubles of putting a large society into gear, and seeing almost 3,000 plus families living in that space, having access to retail, having access to office spaces, beautiful green environments. We had planted urban forest there, which is an example of like a Miyawaki forest. And access to so many more amenities and a completely different lifestyle than they would have otherwise had if they lived in smaller communities. So then again, it was a testament to how worth it is to do complex developments, because they generally allow people to have a much higher quality of life. So one of the things that will naturally result from this is, as you have larger and larger townships, is that RWAs will find it more and more difficult to run their communities. These are now almost like mini cities, and they require a lot of technical know-how, a lot of ability to manage people. They are like little organizations of their own, and many have struggled actually with that. But what we've seen is also the ability of RWAs and large associations to drive change in their own neighborhoods, to actually put pressure on the local government and municipal authorities to get things done that that would support their own community. And I think this is, I would say, the 360 and the best way in which you can actually drive social change. It's the power really of these communities to have a much larger voice and to actually get that kind of make that kind of impact on public stakeholders. Many of you would have heard about BAF, which is Bangalore Apartment Federation. This is one such community that integrates a number of apartment communities across Bangalore, and they've been actually able to drive quite a bit of change with the erstwhile BBMP. They've been running programs on how to run RWAs itself, how to educate and basically professionalize the business. So these are all great ways in which the way in which we manage our cities at a micro level itself can be done in a much, much better and more impactful way. So finally, as we look ahead, what are the major themes that we would see in 2045? I like to think of it as one township at a time, but naturally there is opportunity for a lot of smaller developments as well. But I think in our country especially, one of the biggest factors is climate resilience, and how are we going to really make our cities much more livable given the amount of urbanization that's going to happen. That stat was 35 to 50% in just a matter of less than 10 years. So you can just imagine this city becoming that much more dense and urban, and that playing out across the entire country. So what does that mean in terms of the quality of air, water, health, the ability to walk around, to generally, have the kind of quality of life that we deserve, given the kind of economic activity that is coming out of Indian cities. I mentioned again about the governance and better governance through our communities and how that could actually drive a lot of social change. And finally, I think underlying all of this is technology. I usually don't mention it as a specific point because I think by now it is ubiquitous to everything that we do. Technology is just embedded in everything, and mentioning it as a separate thing, generally doesn't acknowledge the kind of role that it plays in day-to-day. So today, if you don't have a digital aspect to your business, or if you haven't thought about tech first in terms of how you're running it, I think the point is generally missed. So underlying all of this is, how is technology going to help us get to where we need to go? Thanks to the visibility of what is happening, the quality of data that is out there, what you can do with that data, and most important of all, how is that data going to drive your future decision making. So overall, I would say the opportunity that exists for real estate today, I would say in all sectors, but predominantly in residential, as the job market grows, as the economy grows, we will only require more and more need for housing. And our job here is to really make that housing, much more climate resilient, better for the everyday customer, much more affordable. And in that, I think we would have done our job in helping our country become the place to be in the years ahead. So I'll stop now, but I'm happy to take any questions if you might have in terms of what I've just spoken about.
Hi, thanks. That was a nice one. My question is, Gen Z today seems to be having a mind of their own, which is quite different from obviously earlier generations on ownership specifically. This has been proven in cases of many things, including automobile or jewelry, any, say, sizable purchase. Do you think that it is going to affect real estate ownership also, the way that they think about it, little more transient rather than permanent kind of thing? And if so, do you have any plans to offer anything which can be more of interest to them, or change your offering so that it's more of interest to them rather than the old way of...
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think this question came up even for the millennial generation. So millennials themselves started to buy homes at a much later stage in life. But we did see the pattern continuing. But that said, what has happened so far is not necessarily what's going to continue to happen, although many of the major trends may still be there. But I think what's underlying is Gen Z is searching for something else, some kind of purpose. I still believe that after a certain point in time, it's a very human thing. Like if one is settling down and having a home, or let's leave aside the home, settling down, having a family, children need to go to school, you need predictability in your life, and that's kind of when you start to see all these shifts happen. That's when people need to have a place of their own. Now, whether it's rented or whether it's owned, of course, is the question. There also, I feel there's enough opportunity for both. Typically, in India, so far, we have not had too much of an opportunity to do rental housing. That's because the yield on, pure rental in residential is too low compared to the kind of home loan mortgage rates that we have. But I believe in future there will be an opportunity for this, especially if we're able to add on a service layer, which can result in a higher yield, at least on that asset class per se. And then again, that sector can attract institutional capital, which again makes the cost of financing lower. This whole sector is called multifamily in the Western markets or other developed markets. And I think at some point, it will have to come to play here. I think there are some few players who are trying it out. Co-living is one kind of example, although that's like a very short-term lease and a very quick turn. But I think there are some initial kind of experiments happening in this sector. The other thing is, even if it is about buying a home, it's about making it palatable to Gen Z. So those are the two themes that I think will not go away, is the sustainability aspect, because they do have much more awareness about the environment and are more geared towards buying sustainable or buying green. And then the trend that I've anyway talked about mixed use. It's about experience, lifestyle, having access to a hybrid kind of environment. So what is not going to change is people will need somewhere to stay, but what will change is potentially how you are able to communicate to them and what is the kind of product. And then finally on the capital side of it, are they going to rent or own? So there are opportunities there as well. I think earlier today I missed that talk from the Strata guys, but I think that's also a very interesting part of the industry to keep an eye on.
Awesome delivery from there. You have done a great job as a leader at the country level. So I have a question for you. See, as far as the value chain analysis is concerned, the time needed to construct a multi-story building, it's a critical factor, right, in costs, right? So China has shown, how quickly you can build up a apartment. Are you thinking on those lines, particularly from the time cost value chain analysis? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I feel that we should have probably been further down that path, not just as a brigade, but as an industry as a whole. But what's happening today is, as of now, labor is still cheap enough that we think it is cheaper to do things the traditional way. But we're all seeing the slow effects of that, or not the slow effects, but the slow trends that are coming to play, especially in southern markets. As you see more and more infrastructure projects happen in different parts of the country, it is certainly impacting the amount of labor that comes into our core markets for construction. So labor costs are going up marginally and slowly. It's not been a dramatic shift like during the post the lockdown, but you are seeing those increases on the labor side. It has not been dramatic enough where people suddenly find that it is much cheaper to mechanize. But I think that is something that will happen over time. The other big shift is just the ability to look at the entire planning and design cycle as part of your construction cycle, where you can save time as well. So if one is trying to do things in parallel, design, you're planning your GFCs while you've already started excavating and so on, I think there is where many developers try to optimize this part of the cycle today. But if one took the time to plan out every single thing in advance, even if it takes longer compared to the traditional planning cycle, to invest the time for a longer plan and then, find the savings on the construction side of it, I think that is the real win. And that's what happens in other more developed economies where the cost of labor is so high. So that's a change that will happen over time. But I think it could happen at a pace where we don't expect it. So as of now, there is, the increase in labor cost is marginal because the supply of labor is also fairly decent. But as soon as that changes, as soon as there is a shock to the supply, we will see a lot more solutions come up on this front and a lot more willingness to try to mechanize things more.
I have one more question for you. See, you can buy land. Of course, it's tough to buy land, I know, with the government being sitting on everything there. And capital is available, okay? But your key personnel, the people, the 10 people who matter you most, does it give you any area of food for thought for this forum to, how do you handle that critical part of those 10 core people, the team? Can you just throw some light on that?
Yeah, I think, like you said, land is raw material for this business. I mean, that's how we have to look at it. It's key, it's critical, but it's also raw material for a developer. I would say the most important aspect of any organization is the people. What's different is the people, the culture, and your choice of business model, which again comes back to the people making those decisions. So I think especially for organizations going through a transition, going through generational kind of change, that is the most important aspect. One is finding the right people to take things forward and to scale. And the second is to do it while keeping your core values and culture the same, or at least true to what it was in the beginning. No one's saying culture should never change, it should evolve. But something makes each company special. So as that company evolves, like how do you get people to retain that, but how do you also grow and keep changing? I think that's the number one thing. It's really about people more than anything else. We can talk about access to capital and land and customer, but if you have everyone unified around a vision, that's the X factor.
That's what most CEOs do not speak. It's an unspoken matter, right? Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. Hi, Pavitra. So the most recent problems that we have facing in metro cities like Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai. Everywhere is AQI and congestion, right? These are the two things which most of the cities in India are facing today. So while you are reshaping India in 2025, do you have plans to bring these kind of large communities, where large ecosystems which are self-sustainable, where you have healthcare, office, home, everything in tier 2 cities, where like best example is how now Bangalore, Mysore is so well connected, where places like Mysore or Hubli or these kind of tier 2 cities, does it have enough potential to get townships where people like Brigade or companies like Brigade can start shifting this decongestion, or start to think of the decongestion like how you all started thinking of sustainability 10 years back? Well, nobody knew what sustainability is, or bringing in green into buildings.
Yeah, I think there is always an opportunity to do that. In cities, of course, you need to have a certain amount of size and scale. One of the challenges is always to convince people to move from individual homes into larger communities. If it's a multi-story community, that's a very different lifestyle change. But you could still have townships with large scale infrastructure, and you could still have villa communities, built around that. It may not necessarily be an opportunity for us. Again, I would say for every organization, there are things. You can always do everything, but do you really need to do everything? Or should you be doing everything? So, but I believe there is definitely opportunity in every city for somebody local there to figure out what it is that people want. But building large townships is also something very complex. Something I didn't talk about was how do you fund and build a township and manage the capital across the multiple different phases. That's a very complex thing, especially if you're doing something other than residential, which generally is easier to monetize and is capital light compared to the others. But I think townships themselves, or any large communities themselves, because one is able to design for huge groups of people, is sustainable by nature of itself. You're coming in with a new plan and deciding how this is going to work for a large community at scale, as opposed to, having to make that same change for a very fragmented number of households. So I do believe that while new construction gets a lot of bad rap because, you're about the carbon footprint, but I do believe in terms of changing habits and in terms of greening people's lives, you can do that with development.
I think in tier 2 cities, the per capita income of the overall population and the existing population also matters to plan something for that particular city.
Yeah, and also large townships require a different way of constructing, which again is more expensive. So it all depends on the math. That said, there's a lot of tier 2 cities who are selling at rates that Bangalore used to sell at 5 years ago.
Absolutely.
8,000, 9,000, maybe more per square foot. So those numbers used to pencil out for us some time ago. So assuming land costs are in check, I think it is definitely very possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, the question is the organization like yours, like Brigade, is building such a large and beautiful places with so many infrastructure and things like that. So when the property goes in the hands of RWA, how do you ensure that similar kind of quality and other things are maintained? Because always they are looking at cutting the cost and various things. So how do you handle these kind of situations? Or Brigade, is anything you are involving later also to maintain a certain standard or things like that? Or so what is that you are doing?
Yeah, that's a challenging thing to do. At the time of handover, I think RWAs typically, they go through this whole cycle. The first part of the cycle, they don't want to take over from the developer at all. Then eventually they want to take over, but then have nothing to do with the developer. And then after having run it themselves for some time, they realize they need some help with maybe the CapEx or some consulting on what needs to be overhauled, etc. I think the tougher part of it is just to stay involved in some way or form after handing over. And that's one of the reasons why we started our community management platform. It's not the most easy to do because now you're continuing to stay in the same, I would call it more of a brand building kind of exercise, because you want to stay involved so that by having some contribution or some kind of involvement in how the township or any community is run, you can also preserve the brand a little bit better. I think we've seen many examples today where communities run by RWAs have faced very high profile and public kind of issues, whether it is on water quality or accidents or anything. And many times the developer is not really present, but the brand gets pulled into it. So there is, I feel, room for us to focus on that a bit more. It's just a little challenging to push efforts from any organization to something where you've already done like 99 to 100% of the economic activity, and now you're doing something that will pay off maybe in the very long term. But I do believe that it's too complex now to run these communities, and it does require some kind of professional management. But yeah, it's found to be expensive. Even if you go to a JLL or a CBRE, they tend to get kicked out after some time because they're too expensive.
My question is that, so what's next for Brigade? In the sense that you've been doing so much work in the community building and you've been building townships, etc. Which part of the whole ecosystem of the real estate space, and there's so much more happening, right? You just mentioned about, you got the opportunity to go through our agenda.
Yeah.
We spoke about fractional ownership, there was a lot of real estate investment that we were talking about, and many other things. So for you, what is the next step for Brigade to kind of venture into something which is not the traditional?
Yeah.
Of course, that will continue to happen. It's the bread and butter and you do it really, really well. But are you kind of tapping into something that is beyond the traditional and conventional
Yeah.
means of real estate?
Yeah, in terms of the markets, I think that's more of the bread and butter, and then doing more of the same in different parts of the country. So I'll leave that aside. But it would just be different segments within the sector. So I mentioned on senior living, I mentioned on co-living. It may not necessarily be co-living, but I do believe what we call managed living, or which is managed rental, which is basically, communities where the developer stays on and manages the property and doesn't sell, and manages like a 11-month lease on a recurring, like a property management kind of. On the residential side, people are already used to this on the commercial side, but on residential, I think eventually there will be major opportunities there. Senior living, I mentioned that already. Student housing is a big sector. So one of the things to do is to look at developed or more institutionalized markets and see what kind of opportunities they have. So apart from these kind of niche sectors, maybe industrial and warehousing becoming a much larger player, there isn't too much that we're not already doing. Data center is another growing area. So it's easier to sort of look and see what has been done. Of course, everything gets tweaked or adjusted for being in India, but those are majorly the opportunities. Then I would say, just as an organization, as a company, there is still a lot of room in terms of how we do our business. One is what you're doing and what you're choosing to do and where you want to play, but how you do it. And I know AI is a buzzword today, and there's too much being spoken about AI, but what cannot be disputed is that it will change how we get work done. So there is a great opportunity there for Brigade or any company to really look at how we get the work done and maybe remove a lot of the core repetitive stuff for greater efficiency, for better customer service, and then focus our talent, like we were talking about hiring the best talent, and focus on getting the best talent to really understand and drive insight and look at the business in terms of growing it, as opposed to doing the same thing over and over again. So things like AI, and definitely on sustainability, we say it a lot, but I believe it's one of the most challenging things to do today, is to make your business completely sustainable or ESG friendly is one of the hardest things, especially in this industry, because there are so many commitments up front. And it's very scary to do something different and not know how that building is going to turn out or the impact on the quality. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that I hope continues to get a lot of mind space and attention from major decision makers.
You spoke about data centers and how India is going to manage the power, because it needs huge power, right? Without power, there are no data centers. Like how the real estate sector is considering that?
So I think many have set up their own solar farms and have to figure out how to do it on a green basis. So how do you get green power, which is why the solar farms is a big aspect of it. It is still a very nascent sector in the country. But I think with all of the trends that are there in terms of data localization, your Data Privacy Act, it is one area where there will be a lot of growth, and it has already attracted, I would say, the attention of some of the largest players. So along with real estate, I think that's only a drop. As you mentioned, the power generation is the bigger picture of it. So you see very large infrastructure players getting into the space. And I believe that they will have a much bigger advantage in terms of running a data center business as a whole. So it's less about the real estate. Actually, that's the easiest part to do in a data center. The tougher thing is, figuring out how to run and set up a data center and, the power requirements. The land part is the easiest. So that can, that's telling you something about the sector. The land part is the easiest. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Pavitra Shankar, one more time, ladies and gentlemen. We would request you to stay. May I please request Shrikant Iyer, CEO and founder, Home Lane, to kindly present a token of gratitude. We could keep that rolling. We'll give a big round of applause one more time. Thank you. We greatly appreciate your time. Thank you.